Okay. says the Mishnah 32a. Shachat es haveshet. So one slaughters the esophagus, the esophagus. Pots like es gargaris, and then he tears the trachea. So you do one out of two. So in baseball, you're going to the Hall of Fame, but we'll see what happens. You do one out of two. So baseball, it's an American sport. So it's you do the esophagus and then you tear the trachea, or I have to stay awake somehow, So pasek es gargaris, or you tear the trachea and then you slaughter, you shacht the esophagus. Thank you. Case number 3. O shachat echad mehen, or you do one of them, esophagus or trachea. Vehimtin la ad shemesa, and then you wait. You sit there looking at the clock until the animal dies. That's 3. 4. O shechlit esa sakin takas hasheni. You shechted one of the pipes, trachea or esophagus. The second pipe, you do a hachlada, which means you go from the back and you tear the pipe, not from the front, from the back. So, pasku, and then it gets torn from that area. So now, a machlokas. Rabbi Yishovav Omer, nevela. He says the animals in nevela. Nevela and treifa, both animals that are not fit for consumption. Nevela, so Jules wanted to know, I saw they have a long footnote about this coming up on the next Mishnah, but Avi Avos Hatuma, the highest level is a corpse. After that, you have an Avatuma. Lower down are a number of a Zav and a Zava and a creepy crawlies and a Nevela. So a Nevela gives off to a Treifa, it does not. So we're going to get about what's a Nevela, what's a Treifa. That's the topic of today. So he says, Omer, Nevela. These cases all render the animal nevela, and therefore they will give off impurity. Do not disturb. It'll keep popping up on my screen. So nevela. Rabbi Akiva Omer treifa. Rabbi Akiva says it's a treifa. Okay. Klal Amar Rabbi Yishoviv. Rabbi Yishoviv said a general rule. Mishum Rabbi Yoshua. In the name of Rabbi Yoshua. Kol shenifsala bishchitasa, anything which gets invalidated through a shchita is a nevela. Kol sheshchitasa kiraui, anything which the shchita is done properly. V'davar acher garam la, but something else causes invalidation. So then, something else causes invalidation, it's going to be a treifa. So it's important to get this rule down because we're talking about it a lot now. So anything which invalidates with a shchita, like these cases, you're doing a shchita and then you tore, or you went from the back, or you waited till it died. So all those cases, Rabbi Yishove says, those are all going to be a nevela, as opposed to something from the outside, one of the fatal wounds, for example, causes its death, then it'll be a treifa. And Rabbi Akiva, v'hodu lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva agreed. He retracted his opinion. So the Mishnah starts off with that. They're arguing, but now Rabbi Akiva agreed. Okay. says the Gemara. Yeah, shachat esavesht. One slaughters the esophagus. So you're not going to know when I know it, when I don't know it. I'm just going to keep doing that. So yes, shachat esavesht. One shechted the esophagus, etc. So meaning we're quoting our Mishnah of these cases where you shechted the esophagus and you tore the trachea, or you tore the trachea and shechted the esophagus. Either way, avahodulo Rabbi Akiva, and we jump to the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva agrees that all these cases are a nevela. Okay. So now, what's wrong with that? A Mishnah later on says as follows: Veraminhi. By the way, Steve, it says Veraminhi sometimes and Veraminhu. What's the difference? I don't know. Just notice that they both mean to throw another Mishnah against this Mishnah and contradict it. Male and female. So then when is when? When is each one? Yeah. So Veramin he. So he's a he. Okay. So but then Veramin who's also who? He in Hebrew. We don't know who it is. Don't know who he is. Okay. Veramin he elu trefos b'behema. The Mishnah says that the following are the trefos in an animal, and it goes and lists next page. One of them is nikuvas havesht uposekis hagargeris, the making a hole in the esophagus or tearing through the trachea, render the animals to be a trefa, not a nevela. Rabbi Akiva just agreed to Rabbi Shovab. And the cases in our Mishnah are cases of nevela. Well, some of those cases are tearing of the trachea. So yet it's rendered a trefa and not a nevela. So Amarava, and we have a number of answers to this. Amarava lo kasha kan sheshachat ulibasof pasak kan shepasak ulibasof shachat. So there's one case where you slaughter and then you tear. Slaughtering and then tearing, that's going to be our Mishnah. That'll render it a nevela. Kan shepasak, the case where it's torn and then shechted, so then that's going to be a trefa. Yeah. So says the Gemara. Yeah. The case where you slaughter and then you tear. So you shech the esophagus and tear the trachea. So we say nifselish b'shchitahi. That's an invalidation through shchita because you're slaughtering and then you tore. So that's not something from the outside. That's during the shchita, an invalidation. Therefore, it'll be an avela. That's our Mishnah. However, pasak l'basov shachat. At first, it's torn and then it's shechted. So that's the same. That's equivalent to ki davar acher garam la lipasel damya. That's similar to something else causing its death. Once you tear the esophagus, so then right now it can't survive. So that's like something else caused its death, not the shchita. Because before you started the shchita, it's already invalid. So that's not a problem with the shchita. Yeah. Do not disturb didn't work. So yeah. Okay, so that is that. Now, Eisvei Rav Acha Bar Huna l'Rava. Here's your Rav Acha Bar Huna. Rav Acha, the son of Huna, l'Rava. Yeah. Yeah. L'Rava, that's a good question. Shachat es havesht, he says that when you shecht the esophagus, upasik es gargeris, our Mishnah says 2 cases. The first case is you shechted the esophagus and tore the trachea. What's the second case? Pasuk es gargeris, you tore the trachea and then shechted es havesht. And yet we say it's an avela. So how can you tell me that the reconciliation of the 2 Mishnayos is, it depends what you did first, a shchita or a tearing. And if you do a tearing first, it's called the trefa. Our Mishnah's second case is you tore the trachea and then you shechted the esophagus. And yet Rabbi Akiva said that's an avela, not a trefa. So how could that be your reconciliation? Doesn't make sense. So the second case of the Mishnah, you have to say, according to that reconciliation is, Ema v'kvar shachat es havesht. It's not that you right now shechted the esophagus. It's that it was already shechted. Kvar shachat es havesht mi kara. So Amar lei. That was Rav Acha. That was Rav Acha's question on Rava. Rava answered, but now Rav Acha has 2 problems with that. Amar lei, that can't be the second case when it's already been shechted. Shtei tshuvos there. I have 2 answers for you, meaning 2 questions on this emendation of the Mishnah. First of all, chada dahainu kamaisa. That would make case 2 equal to case 1. If you already shechted the esophagus and then did the trachea, that's case 1. So what's case 2? was already shechted and then you tore the trachea, that's the same thing. So that can't be one case. Then case 1 and case 2 are the same. The ode, it's pretty explicit. Hatnan the acharkach. It says you did one and then you shechted. So don't tell me it means that you already shechted. First of all, there's a repetition. It'll be the same as the first case. And second of all, the words definitely don't imply that. Okay, so Elam Rava, he has to get a new answer. How do you reconcile these two Mishnayos? Elam Rava, Elu Asuros Katani, V'yesh mehen nevelos, v'yesh mehen trefos. So he says, you know what? That second Mishnah, later on, in exactly 10 pages from now, so you have to say, really what it's referring to is general prohibited animals. Some of them are nevelos, and some of them are trefos. So when it says elu trefos, those are trefos, it doesn't mean that they're only trefos. Trefos is one example of things that are prohibited to consume. What it really means, the next Mishnah, the Mishnah in 10 pages from now, really means these are the prohibited animals. Some are trefos and some are nevelos. Even though it only says these are trefos, but sometimes when you say something, it doesn't mean it exclusively. So this happens all the time at home. I tell one kid, I love them. And another kid says, why, not me? I said, no, also you. So elu trefos is not an exclusion of a nevela. It can be also a nevela. Now, once you've opened up the door that Mishnah is referring to nevelas also, well, then we're going to say, so why did it not list the following cases? We have two cases that are also prohibited that were omitted from the Mishnah, which would seem to imply that you read the Mishnah like it's written. These are the trefos and not referring to nevelas, to which we're back to our question. So it says, now that you told me it's trefa and nevela, you should consider Chizkiya's case, that you should count that as one of the cases. What did Chizkiya say? Damar Chizkiya. I gotta get you at least the Fansky video. It's funny. Damar Chizkiya aso gistra nevela. Gistra is when you cut the animal into two. So his video is animal into two, and then they keep walking their own ways. So one goes onto a bus, one goes into a bakery. So Damar Chizkiya aso gistra nevela. That's a case of a nevela. So once that Mishnah is talking about trefa and nevela, why did you not mention this case of nevela? That's one question. Second question, for the Chashuv Nami Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says, I'm Rabbi Lazar, Natla Yarech v'chalal shala. If it removes its thigh and the cavity, meaning the whole thing, the whole limb in its entirety has been removed, that's very noticeable, that big hole there, well, that's also a nevela. So once that Mishnah is talking about nevela, it should list these cases. So says the Gemara, Ki katani nevela delo metame mechayim. Aval nevela de metame mechayim lo katani. So we're going to keep our assumption that Mishnah is trefa and nevela. You want to know why these two cases weren't mentioned? That's because after these two cases became a nevela, they're still jerking around and they're still considered alive. We gave cases where it was dead, where you tore the trachea, you tore the esophagus, things like that. They're dead. In this case, they're still moving around. They're still considered alive. And therefore, we didn't mention animals that cause impurity while they're alive. Rather, we're talking about animals that caused impurity when they're dead. Yeah. Okay. So now, so that's one answer. That is the answer of Rava. Rava states that answer, and he answers the different rebuttals on him. That Mishnah is talking about trefas and nevelas, and therefore we don't have a question. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Lakish, so he says as follows: Amar kan sheshachat b'makom chatach. Our Mishnah is talking about that you shechted in a pre-existing hole in one of the pipes. Sheshachat b'makom chatach, and kan sheshachat shelo b'makom chatach. And in the other case, it's where you shechted with no pre-existing hole in the pipes. So let's see. Shachat b'makom chatach nifsala b'shchitasehi. If you shechted in the place that it has a hole, so that's considered a shchita. That's considered an invalidation while you're doing a shchita. You're doing a shchita and you're cutting a hole that already existed, and presumably it's a hole that's obviously not big enough to kill the animal because then it'll be a treifa. But it's a hole that's significant, or it's a hole on some level, and you're cutting in that area. So that's an invalidation through shchita. That's our Mishnah. That's a nevela. The other mission that's a treifa is he shelo b'makom chatach. You're cutting not in the place of a hole, and therefore it sounds like that hole is going to be what's going to kill the animal, and therefore ki davar acher garam lali pasal damya. It's the same. It's as if there's another part of the animal that caused it to be invalid because that hole is not where you're cutting it, and therefore it's like it already has invalidation, nothing to do with the shechita, and therefore it's considered a treifa. Okay, now that Rav Shimon Lakish made this distinction, we're going to ask on him from himself. Umi Amar Rav Shimon Lakish Hachi. Did he really say this? The Hamar Rav Shimon Lakish Shachad Esakana, one who shacks the trachea. Thank you. V'achar kach nikba hareya, and then the lungs. Finally, we get to the lungs. That's like, exciting part of the animal, the lungs. So, and then the lungs have a hole. Sheira, that's fine. Why? Because the assumption is, ask your local anatomy expert, but the assumption is that the lungs are fully dependent on the trachea. So if the trachea gets cut, the lungs go along with the trachea. So even if afterwards you find a hole in the lungs, that's fine. Alma kiman demancha b'dikula damya. It's as if that whole part of the animal was removed from the animal. Since the lungs are dependent on the trachea, and you shechted the trachea, so it's like you took that entire part of the body out. It's like it comes together. It's a full package. We don't view the lungs as a separate part of the trachea, since its life is dependent on the trachea. So therefore, they go together. And finding a hole in it afterwards. So imagine finding a hole in it afterwards when it's already in your suitcase, ready to go. So that's not going to do anything because the hole is already after you already slaughtered it. So too, it's in the animal now, but we view it. You can view it as if it's picking off the trachea, and therefore you're good to go. So that is okay. That case is good. Fine. Alma, yeah, fine. So hachanami kiman demancha bedikula damya. So once Rav Shimon Lakish says this case, so you should say the same thing. You should say the same thing that what? 1 second. One second. You should say that when he finds a hole, when he. 1 second. So meaning when you have a case of, let's say in our Mishnah, when there is when you tore the trachea and shechted the esophagus, since one sec, what's the question?
Yes, since the greater part of the trachea was split before the shechita, the trachea is defective only when the greater part is split. Reish Lakish should regard the trachea as no longer part of the animal's body. Hence, even when the slaughterer severs not the place of the prior cut, it's if he was severing only one part of the esophagus. Since it is not a valid shechita, the animal cannot be viewed as properly slaughtered as a properly slaughtered treifa. That Reish Lakish does consider treifa is inconsistent with the reasoning in the case.
So meaning Reish Lakish, our Mishnah said, if you cut in the place of a pre-existing cut, if you shucked in that area, so that's going to be that's going to render the animal a nivela, but that's not in line with this reasoning because you should view it as what?
No, if it's not in the cut,
then what?
The trachea is defective anyway.
Okay.
So you basically kill the animal would basically have a treifa anyway because the trachea was no good.
That's good. We said that.
So you cut somewhere else, then you're cutting a dead animal, dead man walking.
That's good. That's consistent.
Keeps your treifa.
That's good. That's what it says. If you cut, 1 second. So what? 1 second.
what's the question?
1 second. We're talking about the case where you tore one of the you tore.
It should be in the belly.
Was it okay, it looks it's like a little fancy. Why do you view when the animal has a hole in another area, and now you shecht the trachea? Is it considered a treifa? Rather, since you cut the trachea properly, right? You cut the majority of the trachea. You should view it as it's been removed, like it's been removed from the animal. So since there was a good shchita, the trachea was a good shchita. The fact that it has a hole in another area,
He's putting it in the belly because she was what?
Just 1 second. Sorry. Sorry. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, here too, where the guy shechted not in the place of the cut. So where's the hole? The hole's on the trachea? It's a split trachea. So the split trachea should be regarded as if it were removed from the animal's body and placed in a basket. The animal should thus be considered a vela, not a treifa, as Reish Lakish says. Why? Since the greater part of the trachea was split before the shchita, Reish Lakish should regard the trachea as no longer part of the animal's body. So even when you go and do the shchita afterwards, even if that shchita is not in the place of, even if it's not in the place of the cut, but you should view that like the trachea is not there anymore. And therefore it's like you're only cutting the esophagus, and that's not valid. Okay. So meaning once we have this novelty of Reish Lakish that the same case of a trachea and then a hole in the lungs, you could view the trachea as it's been removed from the animal. Once the trachea has been cut, it's like it's been removed from the animal. So too, you have a split trachea, the hole in it. Even if you slaughter another part, not in the place of the hole, we should view it that since it's already been has a hole in the trachea, it should be considered as if it's removed from the animal, and therefore any following shita would be only like severing one pipe and not two pipes. So that logic of Reish Lakish is not consistent. So Ella, third answer, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo kasha. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So Ella Rabbi Chia bar Yach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo kasha. Kan kodem chazara, kan le'achar chazara, u'mishna lo zazim koma. So interesting technical rules in setting up of the Mishayos is that Mishnah later on was actually taught before Rabbi Akiva's retraction in our Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva held our Mishnah as a treifa, which would be consistent with the Mishnah later on. Then Rabbi Akiva retracted in our Mishnah, but the Mishnah later on does not reflect that retraction. Now, since that Mishnah was taught in the way that it was taught, they didn't uproot the Mishnah from its place. However, once he retracted, so they put that retraction in our Mishnah. So really, Rashi explains that even though generally we say there's an order in the Mishnayos, but that rule that there's an order in the Mishnayos, especially in one tractate, that rule is specific to when you have an anonymous Mishnah and then you have two opinions arguing. There we say that there's a specific order. If you have an anonymous Mishnah and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi made a machlokas over the same concept, so then we say it's a retraction, there's a specific order to it. But when you have this kind of case, there's not necessarily a specific order. So really it comes out that the Mishnah on 32a is really after the Mishnah on 42a, because our Mishnah says Rabbi Akiva retracted. The Mishnah on 42a, it was taught that way, but then there was a retraction. That Mishnah doesn't reflect that retraction. Our Mishnah does. And therefore there's no question at all. Yeah. Gufa, Amar Shimon Lakish, Shakta Sakarakak Nikla Hareyak Shera. Back to Shimon Lakish. If you check the trachea, and then there's a hole in the lungs, it's good. It's considered shera because the lungs are peeking off the trachea, and therefore it's like it's been removed from the animal in its entirety, and you're good to go. So having a hole in an animal a hole in a part of the animal that's been removed is not a problem. Now, Amar Rava, lo Amar B'Shimon Lakish Ela B'Reya. That's only by the lungs hole v'chayereya tluya b'kana, because the lungs are dependent on the trachea. Aval b'pnei me'ayim lo, but the intestines, an issue in the intestines, that depends on the esophagus, not on the trachea. So there, we're not going to say this. That's going to be a problem if you had a hole in the intestine. It's not peeking back. Its lifeline is not the trachea. On that point, after it has signs of a treifa, so then hitarta, you permitted it. So mali bereya, mali bibnei me'ayim. So once it got signs of a treifa, like holes, and you already permitted it because you shechted the trachea, so why does it matter if it's the lungs or if it's the intestines? 1 second. But only a case where you slaughtered the trachea? 1 second. According to Rabbi Zera, once you're already done half the shechita of the trachea, and therefore you can't become a treifa anymore, so then even if you find a hole in the intestines, it also should be good to go. I guess assuming you finish the shechita. If you just stop after the trachea, it's not going to be good. Yeah, once half is done, it's good. Why?
Status changes only when a fully vital animal incurs one of these.
Right. So when a fully vital animal incurs a wound, a vital wound, the animal call it a treifa. But in this case, you did half the shechita, so it's only half alive. It cannot be a treifa. Yeah, that's Rabbi Zera's. That's Rabbi Zera's. And therefore, he has a question that even if a hole in the intestines should also not render it a treifa. So, and then we're going to see now that Rabbi Zera actually retracted this assumption. And he agreed that there's a distinction between the lungs and the intestines. So how do we see that? The Hadar Bei Rabbi Zera. From the following question, we see that he retracted. The Bayi Rabbi Zera Nikvu B'nei Me'ayim. Let's say he asked the question: if the intestines got punctured, Bein Siman LeSiman Mahu, between the trachea and the esophagus, what's the halacha? Mi mitzaref Siman Rishon LeSiman Sheni L'Tara Midei Nevela. Hello. Can you combine the trachea and the esophagus shchita and say that it's no longer an nevela, and therefore it's not going to cause impurity, or not? Do we say that? Can you combine those two or not? Yeah. So that's his question. Can these two the pipe, the trachea and the esophagus, with a punctured inner intestines in the middle, can they combine to remove the animal from a nevela status? Or you say no. You say that they don't combine, and therefore once you shechted one pipe, and then there's a hole in the intestines, so then right now it's a nevela, and we can't combine the second, the esophagus, to purify it. Yeah. Okay. So Mahu Mimitar Simon Simon Chain Latara Mide Nevela Olo. The Amrinon, and we said Lav Hainu Debai Ilfa. Is this not what Ilfa asked? Hotzi. So when you shecht an animal and it's pregnant, then the kid's valid for eating. The fetus is valid for eating too. Shechting the animal, the mother helps for the child. The question was, what happens if there's a foot sticks out in the middle, right? So our foot sticks out before the shechita, then it's not going to be good. But what happens if hotzi uber es yado bein siman l'siman mahu? What happens if the hand or the leg sticks out in between the trachea and the esophagus? If it's before and it's no good. If it's after, it's good. What happens in the middle? So, yeah. So, Mahu. So, next page. Do we say that that's the two pipes that were shechted combined to remove the animal from an avela or not? So, but what do you see from the question? Clearly, to eat the animal, it's prohibited. Our only question is to remove it from its nevela status. Now, Rabbi Zer before said that once you shecht the trachea and then it has a puncture, you, Rava, said that the lungs are good and the intestines are bad. Rabbi Zer said, why? Even a puncture in the intestines after the shechting of a trachea, the animal should be kosher because you can't have a treifa on a half vital animal. Treifa can only be on a fully, on a fully alive animal. Half dead, you can't do a treifa. What do you see from here, though? Rabbi Zera, followed by Ilfa, asked the question where you have an animal that was shechted, one pipe, then something happened to it. So the question is it going to be rendered a treifa or a nevela? But everyone agrees you can't eat it. Even Rabbi Zera agreed you can't eat it. So there you see he retracted from his assumption that you can't make that a treifa doesn't work on half of a live animal, meaning a treifa could work. Even after you shechted the trachea, the animal could be rendered a treifa. So that's where you see his retraction. Amalei Ravacha bar Rav, Amalei Ravacha bar Rav, Liravina, to Ravina, Dilma le'olam lo haderbe. Maybe he never retracted. And Rabbi Zera was just asking this question, not according to his opinion, but according to someone else's opinion. Another beautiful idea, you can always get into someone else's world, even though you disagree with them. But you can ask from their vantage point. So I like that. So Rabbi Zera ledvarav the Rava Kamar v'leilo svirle. Rabbi Zera is asking, listen, according to me, it's totally fine. You could not have a treifa on a half vital animal. Only on a fully alive animal you can have a treifa. But according to you, Rava, that say that you made this distinction between the intestines and the lungs, what would you say if it became a treifa between the trachea and the esophagus? Okay. Now, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Shma Mina, we learn from Rav Shimon ben Lakish, who said that when you slaughter the trachea and you find a hole in the lungs, so we view it as if the lungs is already sitting in a basket outside the animal, because it piggies off the trachea. Its lifeline comes from the trachea, and therefore once the trachea has been shechted, so you view the lungs that they're already not part of the animal. So even a hole afterwards is not going to render it a problem at all. According to that opinion, what should come out is the following: Mizamnin Yisroel al b'nei me'ayim, ve'ein mizamnin ovdei kochavim al b'nei me'ayim. So, one second, blinking out. Yeah. So, okay, this is a very interesting case. The non-Jew, one of his 7 prohibitions is Avram and Achai. You can't have a limb from a live animal. So now we're going to get involved in. So by a Jew, once you do a shechita, even if it's still moving, it's fine. It's permitted now, right? A non-Jew doesn't have the laws of shechita. So even after a shechita, if you're going to eat from that animal before it's fully dead, it'll be considered like you're eating from a live animal. So now, according to Shimon ben Lakish, that views the lungs that they piggy off the trachea, but not the innards. So that means that have the translate. Yeah. Sorry. So now that animal that was shechted, and then there's a hole in the lungs. So according to a Jew, it's totally fine to eat because it's valid. But a non-Jew could not eat from it. Now, one second. At this point, the animal's totally dead. No. Meaning in the case where it's not where it's still jerking around.
Yeah.
Got it. In that case, the non-Jew can't eat it, and the Jew can eat it. Good. My timer, you saw this. There should be shchita talia milsa. Came in the ikar shchita mayasa ishrilu over the kachavim the benechir sakilu over mis talia milsa. Honey kevim and damu. According to a Jew, that it all depends on the slaughtering. So you had a good slaughtering. According to the non-Jew, that it depends on just just a nechir, just like just stabbing it, just killing it. So this animal is still jerking around, and therefore it's like Avram and Achai. Amar of Papa Yasimna Kameder Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Ubayi, and I was sitting by Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Ubayi the Emeleh, and I wanted to ask him, but I didn't. I wanted to ask him, could it be Could it be that for a Jew something is permitted, but a non-Jew it's prohibited? Could it be that for a non-Jew it's more strict than a Jew? Velo Amrile. And I didn't ask him. Damina Hataima. Damina, I said Hataima Kamer. He said the reasoning. The reasoning was that by a Jew it depends on shchita, and by a non-Jew it depends on just killing it. But there is other places I have in my head that the Gemara asked such a question. Could it be that for a Jew it's permitted, and for a non-Jew it's prohibited? So yeah. So I didn't ask him because he gave the reasoning. It sounds like you waited till the end of the class, and then your questions will be answered, and they were. So yeah. Tanya Delok Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. We have a brisa not like Rav Yaakov, not like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who says this distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew. He says, "Harot lechem behema kodem shetetz nafsha." If you want to eat from the animal before it's fully dead, for its neshama, its life force leaves. Chotech kizayis basar mi beis hashchita. You can cut some meat from the beis hashchita, that area where you do the shchita. Molcho yafa yafa, salted very, very well to get all the blood out. Medicho yafa yafa, wash it out very well. Mamtin la, and wait ad shetetze nafsha the ochlo, and then you eat it. So everybody echad obed kachavim ve'echad yisol mutarin bo. Then both a Jew and a non-Jew could eat it. So you see that they're equal. But you have to wait till it's fully dead to eat from it. Yeah. So we don't say, that by a non-Jew it depends on its death and it'll be Avram and Achai. We don't say that. Rather,
basically what you're saying is a Jew can prepare it, but he can't eat it.
Right, but we're saying you want to eat from the animal before it's fully dead. So even the non-Jew could do that because it was shechted. We don't say, the non-Jew depends on the killing of the dying of the animal, and a Jew depends on the shechting, and therefore for a non-Jew considered Avram and Achai, like a limb from a live animal. We don't say that. So this brisa is against Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's conclusion from Rav Shimon Lakish. To that we're going to have a support. Misayele le Rav Idi Bar Avin. Rav Idi Bar Avin. Who's Rav Idi Bar Avin? Rav Idi Bar Avin. Yeah, who's he? We haven't quoted him, have we? We're going to Misayele. So this that we just said is a support for Rav Idi Bar Avin. Who is Rav Idi Bar Avin? What did he say? Dam Rav Idi Bar Avin, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Ashion, the son of Ashion. Harot Shiyav, you want to be healthy? So Chotech Kazay's basar, cut a olive-sized piece of meat, mi beis shchita, from the part of the shchita shel behema of an animal. Molcha yafa yafa, salt it very, very well. Medicha yafa yafa, and wash it very, very well. Mamtin la, and then wait until it fully dies. Echad obed kachavim, echad yisrael mutarin bo. Both a Jew and a non-Jew can eat from that. That's a support that even by a non-Jew, if it's been shchita before, if there's been a shchita before it fully dies, you could still partake in it, and that's how you become a healthy person. That's what it says. That's what it says. Yeah. Oh, maybe you can barbecue it afterwards. I don't know. Yeah, depends on your George Foreman. Depends if you're.